Good morning, everyone. We're starting to allow people in. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll get started shortly. Please allow just a few minutes for people to log in. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll get started shortly. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started soon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Lynile, I think we can get started.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's refresher webinar on elevator code and compliance, a refresher, presented to you by AOBA's Emergency Preparedness Committee. My name is Lynile Delcourt. I'm AOBA's Emergency Preparedness Committee chairperson, and I'm also employed by Brookfield Properties, where I serve as Director of Security and Life Safety. Thank you guys for joining us today. Today, we are joined by 3 elevator and fire safety experts, and we are excited, who will discuss the fundamentals of having an elevator in your building and what you need to pay attention to before your next elevator inspection. Our panelists today will consist of Brittany Sullivan. Brittany is the Eastern Region Business Development Representative for Eklund's Total Cab Solutions, based out of Lanham, Maryland. Brittany has over 10 years of elevator experience, specializing in service, modernization, and new installation, in addition to elevator cab, interior designs, and renovation. Brittany has held various positions within the elevator service sector, overseeing operations and sales. Our next panelist is Frank Chenoweth. He is the Technical Director of Fireline Corporation. Frank has been in the fire protection field at Fireline since 1984. Frank is currently the Technical Director at Fireline Corporation. Frank's responsibility as Technical Director includes maintaining code compliance of services performed by Fireline, keeping reports compliant, and keeping up with new requirements as various jurisdictions adopt newer code versions. Frank currently sits on the NFPA 72, that's the National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code Technical Committee for Chapter 14, Inspection, Testing, and Maintenance. As a committee member, he is directly involved with revisions to the code requirements for ITM. Frank also holds NICET certifications in the fields of fire alarm, fire sprinkler, and special hazard for suppression systems, Our next panelist, our final panelist of today, is James Bowers. James is a product specialist at Kings 3 Emergency Communication. James is in his 18th year at Kings 3. He has taken on roles ranging from emergency dispatch, project management, installation and service in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and most recently moving into the product specialist role. As product specialist, James oversees all ASME 2019/IBC 2018 code compliant elevator emergency communications. Before we dive right in, I would like to remind everyone to please stay muted, turn on your cameras, and ask questions through the discussion portion via chat. At the end of today's session, we will have a Q&A, and we will get as many, if not all, of your questions answered. We will have, members are welcome to unmute and ask their questions if they choose to, but at the end of today's session, we will have a Q&A. This session is being recorded and will be available to members after this event ends. With that, let me pass it over to Brittany, who will discuss elevator inspections, annual testing, permitting, contracts, and more. Brittany, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lanile. All right, so I'm gonna kick this off talking about elevators in general. It's always exciting whenever you take over a property and then, hey, my building has an elevator, now what? So I'm gonna go over some general things on what are the responsibilities of a property manager that has an elevator in a building? What are the key things that you need to be aware of to make sure that you're staying in code compliance? And then what do you need to be doing or having your team do on a monthly, periodic, or annual basis?
Brittany, you're muted.
Oh, it re-muted me? Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, did you hear me talk at all?
Yes, we heard it.
Okay, so it just went back to being muted. Okay, so the responsibilities of the property manager, key items to be aware of, and what to do monthly, periodically, and annually. Okay, so the next slide. So ownership of responsibilities. Ultimately, it is the building representative or owner's responsibility to know what is required and when. Many of the elevator service providers lack technology to accurately track when your inspections are coming due and could potentially put your building at risk if it's not kept up to date. Most counties do send notifications regarding your inspections and what type of inspection is coming due to the building agent of record. It's important to reach out to your service provider whenever you do receive that information, letting them know that you've been notified, what the dates are, and what that inspection testing says. Sometimes the information may be different, or I have seen in the past as well where a building gets a notification of a specific type of test that's not actually accurate by the county. And then it's found out whenever people show up to do the inspection, wait, we're supposed to be doing this other type of testing. So it's good to just stay in communication with that service provider to make sure you're on the same page. If you're not receiving any communication from your local AHJ, it could be that they do have incorrect contact information. Maybe it used to go to a PO box that's changed or that person has left. So I do recommend, depending on which local you're in, that you do go to their local website and find out if you can update your contact information. You can also email them directly. And many of them do have different types of communication. Are they sending it via post, or are they doing it via email, or are they not communicating at all? So that's just one good thing to know for your responsibility. So what is required by the state or the county? It's really important to know which code your jurisdiction has currently adopted. You may have buildings in different states or even in different counties. So Fairfax County does not operate the same way as PG County in Maryland. So what is that ASME code that AHJ has adopted? Have they adopted the IBC 2018 code? And a lot of the code adoptions are going to be talked about later on, but this is just one good thing to make sure you're aware of, and also know if a code change is coming. This can help you avoid potentially missing some sort of an upgrade and having a red tagged elevator or additional fees for having to come back and have a reinspection after that component has been modified to meet the code that your building is currently under. The next big important thing with your building is knowing the contract coverage for that specific building. There are property management groups. I know that all of the buildings have the same maintenance agreement. They're all under one. But I've also seen many where every single building has its own contract. So what does that contract say what is covered. You can read the contract yourself. You can reach out to a third-party company like an elevator consultant. If you know people in AOBA that, you know, like myself, who have worked in the industry, that can help you go through your maintenance contract to really decipher what is covered and what isn't covered. And those key areas are, you know, what are my response times? What's my entrapment response time? What testing responsibilities does the elevator company have or that I have? And then what are the miscellaneous coverage items that are covered under those inspections? So, and diving into that a little bit deeper, I say what is covered for inspections, is that's what we're really focusing on today. And so those questions to ask yourself, what are the hours covered for inspections? You know, do I need my inspections to be at 6 a.m., but the elevator service provider only provides service between 8 and 4:30? Does my contract have just annual testing, no load, or do they also cover the 5-year full load? But surprisingly, there are a lot of contracts out there where, to save money at one point, someone didn't include the 5-year and they just wanted to pay for that whenever it comes up. Do you have generator testing as part of your coverage, or is that going to be an additional fee whenever that has to be tested during the annual inspection? What is covered if something fails, and who's responsible for that? What happens if something's broken or damaged? Another one is, do you have fire alarm testing included in your contract? And again, if so, what are the hours? And then are there any time frame limitations that are in your contract for those annual testing? You know, we're only going to give you one person for 1 hour, so then you need to pay for everything outside of that. And overall, if you meet with your elevator service company on an annual basis and you walk your properties and you check for all the key items like maintenance control programs, MCPs, check charts, logs, cleanliness, overall operation of small components, it can actually help limit some of those inspection failures whenever those tests do come up. So, but just as important as it is to know what is covered, it's also really important to know what is not covered. Some of those items are testing of the fire service, phase 1 and phase 2. That's actually a building responsibility unless the contract says otherwise, and should be done on a monthly basis. And a log needs to be kept in the machine room, which has the name of the person that performed the test, the date, and what was tested. It has to be phase 1 and phase 2. If you don't know how to do phase 1 and phase 2 fire testing in your building, ask your service provider. They should have no issue with teaching you how to do that simple test. I do recommend doing the test outside of peak hours. It does take your elevator out of service because it does bring them down to the main egress floor. And then another item that, you know, you should be testing outside of when the elevator company is there doing service is the phone lines. Phone lines can go down, they can become inactive, no notice. And so periodically checking those is a good idea, especially before any testing is done. And Kings 3 is actually going to talk more about communication in a few minutes. And then finally, knowing when your inspections are due and who must be present. So again, a lot of inspection requirements fall under where you're located. But in general, you should have an annual test, a periodic test. If you have a generator, you'll have a generator test, and then you'll have your fire testing. Knowing whenever these are coming due will help you just stay ahead of the game. All of the elevators are going to require an annual test to be performed with a service provider and with a third-party inspection QEI. This test can take anywhere from 1 to 4 hours, depending on the type of equipment and test. And you will also need to know if you need to test that generator. So some of the locals will allow you to test the generator separately because it does cause such a big building impact. So they might let you test that on off hours, but you need to have it scheduled so that, you know, they know you're actually going to be doing it. Traction elevators require that annual or that 5-year full load every 5 years. That's very loud. It's disruptive to the building. Sometimes adjacent elevators need to be taken out at the same time during portions of that test. So these are things that you can plan for ahead of time to see if that's something you want to perform on off hours or during your regular building hours. So in addition to those annual tests, you also have periodic tests. This should be exactly 6 months from the date of your annual testing. And that test does not require the elevator service provider to be there. It is only the elevator inspector, unless you dictate otherwise. Knowing when this is coming due is really important because a lot of times that QEI is like, they get a list, they know which ones have the periodic, and they're showing up to those buildings to check those items, and you might not be aware. But some locals require that there's a building agent on site during that periodic. I recommend having a building agent on site during the periodic because you're getting to witness what they're testing, any items that any items that they might write up, you can question it, but you can also, be able to provide the access, because honestly, if they can't get access, it can be an automatic failure, and then you might have to pay to have them come back out. And being in our area where we have so many buildings that are high security, if you know when your periodic is, you can usually reach out to the testing authority a month in advance and have that conversation with them about, hey, this building doesn't have access. I don't have people on site 24/7. I really need to try to schedule this with you so that I can make sure you can gain access to the elevators and that I have a person there for you so that we don't have to have a re-inspection. And then the last item with the fire testing, this is another item that really should be set up in as much advance notice as possible. A lot of your elevator companies are going to require additional paperwork because of the liability factor, and need to be able to provide you with 2 elevator technicians, which, that has to be scheduled in advance. It's very hard to just pull 2 elevator service technicians from their maintenance route to go do a fire test. So overall, in general, that is the things that really to make yourself be aware of and to think about when you have buildings with elevators. So I'm going to pass it over to James, who's going to discuss emergency communication, which is a key component in elevator code compliance.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Again, my name is James Bowers with Kings 3 Emergency Communications. I've been on staff with Kings 3 for, like they said, I'm in my 18th year as I'm now taking on the role as product specialist, where my focus is elevator communications that fall under the new ASME and IBC code guidelines. Just a little bit about Kings 3. So we were founded in 1989. Our sole focus is emergency communications, answering elevator calls. We do this for commercial properties and multifamily buildings across North America. We do have more than 80,000 units online with our dispatch at the moment, and we receive over 1.5 million phone calls from those emergency phones per year. On average, we receive 1,000 entrapment calls that need to be handled. In addition to that, another 800 or more calls that involve EMS, police, or fire dispatch. Our operators are highly trained, and they're also certified in several medical certifications for dispatch. On the next slide, I'll just go over today's topics, where we're going to go over 2 topics in particular relating to emergency communications. The first being the means of connection, and second, getting a little bit deeper into the recent code updates and how they impact emergency communications overall. So the next slide, we're first going to talk about phone line options. So the first option for getting telephone lines into an elevator, the most common, are POTS lines. This is your standard analog copper line, which has been the most common form, like I said, historically, but they are being phased out. They're becoming less and less reliable as the infrastructure ages, the wiring deteriorates. And on top of that, phone companies are starting to charge exorbitant amounts for these type of phone services, just due to the fact that they are trying to phase them out. Next in line, you'll see VoIP, or Voice over Internet Protocol, is what that stands for. VoIP technology is the direction many properties are going for telephone service. And there are a few areas that VoIP falls short in providing code compliant elevator communication. So I wanted to share that with you here. Most commonly, VoIP systems lack sufficient backup battery to meet the 4-hour code requirements set by ASME. So in the event of a power loss, we don't want the emergency phone system to malfunction based on the lack of backup battery that the phone system itself is providing. Secondly, an issue that we have with using voice over IP for for elevator communications is the transmitting of the necessary tones between devices to tell the operator where the call is coming from. This all has to be done automatically to the operator. They have to be able to identify where that call is coming from without being prompted. And we find that this sometimes can get muddied up in a VoIP system to where it may not send the tones correctly. It may clip the tones. And it also, it can confuse the operator as to where the call is coming from. Lastly, code states that the operator has to have the ability to call back into an elevator. We find this to be challenging on a VoIP system as well. You may get a phone number that doesn't necessarily get you back directly into that particular device. So this is just another reason that we try and deter people from choosing a VoIP option when providing dial tone to their elevators. So lastly, under phone line options is the cellular option. As you can see on our slide, that we highly recommend the cellular option. Cellular technology has gotten so reliable with 4G LTE that's becoming more and more common as a means of connection for emergency communications. It checks all of the boxes as far as backup battery, transmitting the data, and allowing a pathway for the operator to get back into that phone. The second half of this slide talks about connection requirements for systems that fall under the new ASME and IBC codes. Under these new codes, IBC 2018 and ASME 2019, they do require an internet connection, and I'll explain that a little bit further on. Right now, I just want to focus on the types of networks. So really, we've got two types of connections for getting internet into an elevator, either a wired Ethernet connection or a cellular connection. When deciding on this, we need to consider who's managing the network. At Kings 3, we do, like I said, we recommend the cellular option really for two reasons. If you're using the wired internet connection that's on the building's network, you're opening that property up to cybersecurity risks. Any third-party device sitting on the network has potential for cyber attacks. Another reason would be the network management. If an IT department is making changes on the network to any port assignments or reconfiguring ports and what they're used for, you run the risk of inadvertently disabling your emergency communications device. So just for those reasons, we, like I said, recommend the cellular option. With the cellular option, you have a single device on a private network. It doesn't use any of the site's infrastructure, and it's a self-contained connection. So lastly, on this slide, I mentioned QoS, which stands for quality of service. This is basically just programming that prioritizes traffic on your server if you do have these devices on your internal network. Okay, so moving on from there. We're just going to talk briefly about FirstNet. So FirstNet is a network that has been created by AT&T, and Kings 3 has recently partnered with AT&T on FirstNet. So we are now certified to use our equipment on their FirstNet cellular network. So just a little bit about that. It was built with AT&T. It's a nationwide communications network. It's used just for first responders and other public safety personnel. One thing that they like to, a tagline they really like to use, that FirstNet is a network that is the last to go down and the first to come back up in the event of a catastrophe. It's a nationwide communications platform, allows public safety to coordinate emergency responses efficiently, effectively, and across agencies and jurisdictions. This is a separate network from just your standard AT&T cellular network. It's built just for this purpose. Okay, so moving on from FirstNet, I'd like to go ahead and get into a little bit of the code updates as far as IBC and ASME are concerned. So IBC 2018, the update was designed to give passengers who are deaf or hard of hearing or speech impaired two-way, fully interactive visual experience with emergency dispatch rather than just communicating via voice over the emergency phone, which was the only means of communication until this code was written. So here's what they added to the code. This is a visual and text-based and video-based 24/7 live interactive system. It's fully accessible by the deaf, hard of hearing, and speech impaired, shall include voice-only options for hearing individuals. Has the ability to communicate with emergency personnel utilizing existing video conference technology, chat, text software, or other approved technology. So basically what this is saying is it's giving any passenger who may have a disability as far as being speech or hearing impaired, the ability to communicate with an operator via text messaging and that video stream. All right, so now moving on to ASME. First, I'll just get into what the code says, or what it did say up until being changed in 2019. Basically that the emergency communication requirements are a hands-free two-way device between an elevator and authorized personnel, meaning somebody who is on the other end of that phone and is able to take appropriate action. It also requires live 24/7 authorized personnel, no automated answering. It has to go to a live person. And then if you're over 60 feet of rise in that building, you have to have what we call a master station phone, which is on-site communication for people who arrive to respond to the emergency, to be able to communicate with the passenger in the car as well. So next on continuing on with the existing ASME code requirements, location identification. I touched on this briefly at the beginning, where the operator has to be able to know where the call is coming from without being prompted. It has to answer automatically when we call back into the elevator. Again, that was something that I touched on when talking about voice over IP as a means of communication. We have to be able to call back into that car as per code. If no one answers on site, an automatic redirect, basically what that means is there's a secondary number programmed into the device in the event that the first call is not answered in a timely manner. I believe ASME is 45 seconds that the call has to be answered. Then it does roll over automatically to a secondary number where it can still reach authorized personnel. Off-site communications cannot interfere with on-site communications. Basically what this is referring to is once emergency personnel, meaning the fire department, the elevator company, whoever it may be there as the first responder to help the entrapped passenger, third-party dispatch cannot interrupt that call once they are online with the person in the elevator. Local telephone line status monitoring. This is what we refer to as communication failure or phone line verification. Basically what this is a device that sits next to your elevator call buttons in the lobby that monitors voltage of your phone line. If your phone line voltage drops below a certain point, which means the line is no longer functioning, it then sounds a buzzer and activates the light that shows communication failure. This portion was added, I believe, in 2010. Okay, so now moving on to the next slide, we'll just get into a synopsis of what the new 2019 ASME code does state as far as emergency communications. Number one, it must include two-way text-based messaging capable for those who are hearing and or speech impaired, include video capability, display messages, not just a light, to indicate call has been received and help is on site. So what that means is in the past, an emergency phone has a red LED that comes on when you press the button to indicate that you've activated the phone. It then flashes to indicate that the operator has been connected and that you are online with dispatch. This update basically states that that's no longer sufficient. The messaging screen where the operator is texting their questions to the passenger, that screen also has to show a message that help is on the way, rather than just that LED. All right, so now that we know what the new code says, let's get into, I'll walk you guys a bit through of how a call would look like. So on the next slide, here are a couple photos of a dispatcher's screen in our monitoring station. I do apologize for the quality of those. They're not very clear, but they give you the gist of what we're going for here. So if you look at the screen on the left, this is the account information that is sent to the operator automatically to meet that code requirement. The operator has to know where the call is coming from. This shows the account information, the alarm information, anything that operator needs to know where that call is coming from. Then if you'll look at the screen on the right, this is the new portion that's been added for the video and texting piece. So you can see the operator has a clear view of the entire cab. The code does state that the entire cab, it does have to be visible to the operator. In the event of somebody being incapacitated or passed out on the floor, a camera at eye level is not going to show us that. So it is something that we like to be very clear on. The second half of that screen, the right side of the right screen, is the text box. This is where the operator has the ability to type in any question that he or she may like. Those questions, however, do have to be asked in a yes and no format at the moment. The reason being is those are the only options that the passenger has to respond to the operator. So are you stuck in the elevator? The answer is either yes or no. The passenger has those options, and I'll go into that a little bit further on in the next couple of slides. So the operator answers the call, gets this screen, sees the passenger in the car, and tries to communicate verbally with the passenger. So then on the next slide, we'll get a focus of that video screen where it shows if there's no response to verbal communication, then our emergency operator would use the video stream to confirm if there is actually somebody in the car. If the passenger is present and not responded verbally, then the emergency operator will begin nonverbal communication by posting those messages to the screen. So on the next slide, we will see the screen that's actually inside of the car operating panel in the elevator. You'll see the passengers will be able to answer questions on the display. Like I said, using those yes and no options. It's going to be, there are two ways that I'm seeing this being done at the moment, to where the passenger either has dedicated yes and no buttons on the panel that are labeled yes and no to respond, or as you can see on this screen, it is directing the passenger to press either the door open button for yes or the door closed buttons for no. This is just a way that they've repurposed those buttons in the event of an emergency. They can respond to the operator using that feature. Okay, on the next slide, I've just got a table here that shows the evolution of ASME A17.1 to from 2000 to 2019. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see 3 rows have been added to accommodate hearing and speech impaired. The two-way messaging, a means for authorized personnel to view inside the cab. That's the camera piece that the operator can see. And a means activated by emergency personnel to change the cab message to indicate help is on site. This piece I referred to a master station phone anytime you're 60 feet of rise. This piece is added to the new code that actually requires the same capability that the operator has for on-site personnel, meaning they have to have a screen to view inside the cab, and they also have to have the ability to update the in-car message that indicate that help has arrived. Okay, so now on the next slide, we'll go over a bit of the equipment of what's required under the new ASME 2019 code as far as the emergency phone and the video and messaging system. So next, we've got a list of essentially what you'll need, which is that emergency phone that we talked about, a video messaging system, and a closed firewall encrypted communications. This is the internet portion that I was talking about. Lastly, one thing I like to discuss with people when they're deciding on purchasing the hardware for your ASME 2019 solution, it's important to choose a compliant system that doesn't integrate, or that, excuse me, that does integrate with fixtures from a variety of manufacturers. What I mean by this is, think of it like buying an Apple product versus an Android product. So when you do buy an Apple product, you're limiting yourself to those iOS Apple platforms, applications, everything provided by Apple. With video monitoring, you don't want to be in a service agreement with someone you can't really get out of just because they've installed proprietary equipment. Think about when you buy an Android product now. So you've got the freedom to use any service, any application, any platform that is Android based, as is the same with this open source video monitoring. The point is that we don't want you as a customer to be in a service contract that you can't get out of just because of the video solution that was chosen to meet the ASME 2019 code. So moving on, this is just a brief slide where we like to just talk about some of our best practices as far as from a monitoring company standpoint. The first slide refers to testing. Periodic testing, we recommend monthly, ensures that the phone lines are intact and equipment is performing basic functions. Like I said, we recommend this every 30 days. Our equipment, a lot of equipment on the market has the ability to perform automated check-ins where once a month they'll send a signal saying, yes, the phone line still works. Yes, I'm still out here. Unfortunately, what that doesn't tell you is when you have mechanical failures, such as a microphone or a speaker that no longer works. So we do suggest this 30-day physical test of your emergency phones. If you add this to your monthly checklists that are being done at the property, it can help you catch any issues before you have an inspection, or in the event that you may have an emergency and you need that phone to function. So next, like I mentioned, we've got some recommended minimum standards for emergency phone monitoring. This is all outlined on our website at kings3.com. Basically, we've designed this to help you navigate niche elevator communication code, which it really can fall into sort of a niche area between alarm monitoring, elevator service, phone service. There's a lot to it. So there's some really good information on that on our website regarding that. The next slide is just a continuation of that. A couple things I like to point out that are important when selecting a monitoring company to meet your emergency phone needs, whether it be ASME 2019, IBC 2018, or any code prior to that. One thing I like to point out that it's important that your monitoring station is dispatching to the geographically appropriate local emergency response agencies. What this means is you're getting calls to a call center that are not local to your property's location, and they need the ability to send proper authorities for your locale. And that's very important as far as saving time when reaching an actual emergency. Okay, so I believe that's all I have for you guys today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Frank with Fireline.
Thank you. So, yeah, as mentioned, I'm technical director at Fireline. One of the things I deal with on a regular basis is keeping up with the codes, and probably one of the most difficult codes to keep up with is elevators, because they seem to change. Different jurisdictions have adopted different codes, and there are fairly large changes between code years. And then there's also the date of manufacture of the elevator has things to do with what has to be tested. Brittany went over a lot of things that I'm kind of going to touch on, because our portion on the fire alarm side is relatively small when it comes to all the testing that gets done on an elevator. But I'm going to kind of reiterate some of those points. Generally speaking, your state elevator code or your local elevator code are where the requirements are coming from for testing of the elevator equipment and the different functions of the elevator. They're going to govern the frequency of the testing and what actually has to be tested. On our end, the code that we go by on the fire protection end is NFPA 72 when it comes to the life safety. And one of the crossovers that we always run into is that we need to test if the fire equipment is tied into the main fire alarm system, we need to test those devices as part of our fire alarm inspection. And then those same devices need to be tested as part of the elevator inspection. Most of the time we can coordinate that with the end user. In some cases, they may end up getting tested twice. And depending on where they're located, the elevator inspection company may have to return to witness the test, for a second time, which is going to cost more money. The smoke and heat detectors associated with the elevator, as I said, usually they're connected to the fire alarm. In some cases, they are standalone, and all they do is they're just there for the elevators and nothing else. In some states, the elevator and the fire codes don't necessarily agree. The ASME does not require the heat detectors if you have a sprinkler system. The heat detectors in the elevator are tied to shut the elevator down. For fire alarm inspections, we need to test those heat detectors, but ASME doesn't require them to be tested once they've been installed for the shutdown. So we always go back and forth with the elevator people on that. If you can hit the next slide for me, please. So the testing of the elevator equipment, as Brittany mentioned, gets done by the elevator contractor or the third party. So this would include all the items that are directly connected to the elevator for the motor, the doors, all the things that have to be, the functional testing of the elevator equipment. Generally, the testing of the fire alarm equipment associated with the elevator would be done by a fire alarm contractor. In some cases, the elevator inspectors will do that. Often they leave that to the fire alarm contractor who has the inspection contract in the building. Most of the elevator inspection code require a licensed elevator mechanic to be on site if any elevator testing is being performed, and specifically if anyone has to enter the pit or the shaft of the elevator. And generally speaking, a fire alarm contractor won't do that without the elevator company present. In Maryland, everything has to be witnessed by a third party. Brittany mentioned it sounds like a lot of other jurisdictions are going that way too, where there's a third party inspector that needs to be on site to witness the testing, whether they're involved with actually testing it or whether they're just there to witness it and fill out their form. Generally, as a building owner, you should receive a notice about 90 days prior to your expiration of your elevator certificate, And if you keep an eye on your elevator certificate and know, those dates are coming up and you haven't received the notice, then you need to reach out to your certifying body to see what's going on. One of the issues that usually happens is trying to coordinate the fire alarm contractor, the elevator inspection contractor, and the third party all at the same time. That's always a difficult thing, and we all try to get there as quick as possible, but sometimes there's problems with who called what or who scheduled what. So again, I'm going to kind of reiterate a few things here. The safety test on the elevator equipment is performed by the elevator company annually. The fire alarm initiating devices are performed by the fire alarm contractor. And again, that's a general rule, because in some cases the elevator inspector may test those devices without needing us present. And as I mentioned, the heat detector is not required to be tested as part of the elevator inspection, but NFPA still requires this to be done annually. In order to be able to accommodate that, what we would normally do would be to have the elevator contractor bypass all of the shunt trips so that the detector won't actually cause the issues that they've, I guess the problem that they've noted on these heat detectors is that you're shutting the equipment down in a violent way, and then it kills the elevator equipment over time. So if we have the elevator contractor bypass those, we can still test those heat detectors on our end, check off the box on our fire alarm inspection report, and we won't cause problems with the elevator equipment. The smoke detectors, you have the phase 1 and phase 2, which is the primary and secondary recall is commonly known, where the main floor is going to be usually your primary floor, and then the rest of the floors will return the elevator to that main lobby. And then when the lobby goes off, it returns it to an alternate floor so that you're not bringing an elevator down to where there's smoke in the room. Again, generally the elevator contractor will complete their elevator report and check the box that says that the phase 1 and phase 2 has been tested. In some cases, the elevator contractor will sign off on the entire report. In other cases, there's going to be basically 2 different reports, one that the elevator contractor is going to sign off on, and then the other portion for the phase 1 and phase 2 would be signed off by the fire alarm contractor. And as I already noted, generally the fire alarm contractor is not going to do anything that's going to affect that elevator operation without the elevator contractor present. So as you all know, it's a lot of money for those elevators, and we certainly don't want to buy one for you. Some of the forms, this is just a sample form for the state of Maryland. They're similar in the way they work, but this is the basic form that state of Maryland uses for their annual or the 5-year, and it really the work that gets done is condensed down into check 3 boxes and sign it kind of thing. But we have to test all the detectors, make sure the devices are functioning properly, and return the elevator to the correct floor. If usually the fire protection contractor is going to fill out part A there, we're going to look at the certificate for the code year and then indicate that the elevators did operate properly and which floor is the alternate floor. Then we're going to sign off on that part. Generally, the second part is the emergency standby power, and that is going to be performed by the elevator contractor. And like I said, in some cases, they'll end up with 2 of these forms, one for the fire and one for the elevator. And this is a sample form. This is out of my circle, but just to kind of give you an idea of what the other tests are. So as you can see, the fire alarm portion is relatively small, and then this is the checklist that is used by the state of Maryland for all the other items that are associated directly with the function of the elevators. And that is all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank. So I would like to ask everyone to join me and give a virtual round of applause to our three presenters today. Brittany, Frank, and James, thank you guys for your great work and the time you took to put together this powerful presentation and all this great information. This is an area that I feel like a refresher is something needed. We don't really talk a lot about elevators and elevator compliance. And when we speak about elevators from a life safety perspective, we're strictly talking about entrapments and releasing people from entrapment situations. And when we do inspections, we're speaking of making sure that the connection between the elevator cab and a monitoring company are working. But we don't never really go into the extent of what you guys did today. So I really appreciate you all. And on behalf of the AOBA Preparedness Committee, we'd like to really thank you for this great information that will and can be shared to all the members for AOBA. But I can't let you guys off the hook yet because I do have questions. So I wanted to get the thank yous out of the way, and now let's get to the questions. So Brittany, if you don't mind, I'd like to give the first question towards you. In general, when it comes to elevators, what are three main items you should know for each property?
So you need to know your contract and contract coverage, know all of your inspection dates and what inspections are required for that building. And you need to know what your local code adoptions are. And I'm gonna add on to that actually. Just so everyone's aware, because I know everyone's from different jurisdictions. As far as elevator code goes, Maryland is the one that's adopting 2019. They're currently under ASME 2016. DC and Virginia are under 2013 code year. They don't typically skip to code year adoptions, so I'm not sure when they're moving on to 2016. But in addition to that, Maryland and Virginia both have IBC 2018 adoptions. Virginia adopted the 2018 last year with a deadline for compliance by June 30th of 2022.
Perfect. Thank you, Brittany. My next question is for James. James, what are some of the most common reasons elevators fail inspections?
So the feedback that we get on our business is the emergency phone really becoming an afterthought of the inspection process. I deal with a lot of site level people, elevator, either inspectors or installers, service repairmen. And it seems like that's usually the last thing on the checklist is, does the emergency phone work? And that goes into a lot of detail. Or I went into quite a bit of detail about that a few minutes ago. But yeah, that's definitely the number one reason we see an elevator fail inspection is that the emergency phone was not considered when preparing for the inspection.
Got it. Thank you, James. My next question, Frank, will be for you. Will the elevator inspector schedule the fire alarm contractor for that part of the testing?
Generally speaking, if a fire alarm contractor has to be involved with the test, that is something that's going to be the responsibility of the owner to coordinate. So in general, you have three parties that you have to coordinate with. You're going to have a third-party inspector, the elevator contractor, and the fire alarm contractor.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of more questions. Please feel free, either one of our three presenters, to chime in and give your thoughts. One of you guys or all of you guys. If you have a phone number on a bill that you aren't sure what it connects to, it may be your elevators. This is more of a comment, I'm sorry, from Brittany. Your service provider can check the phone number before disconnecting that line to avoid having an operable phone in the elevator cabs. I want to repeat that because this is a statement, not a question. I apologize for that. If you have a phone number on a bill that you aren't sure what it connects to, it may be your elevators. Your service provider can check the phone number before disconnecting that line to avoid having an inoperable phone in the elevator cab. Thank you, Brittany. I want to also follow up on a couple of more comments. One is the state of Maryland requiring third-party witness for elevator smoke detector recall when no devices are located in the shaft? State and third party used to only require state of Maryland reporting from left on site. So the question is to anyone, if you can answer this, is the state of Maryland requiring third party witness for elevator smoke detector recall when no devices are located in the shaft?
Yes,
Councilor, yes.
they're requiring a third-party inspector for any portion of that elevator test.
Great. And if one of you guys, I have one more question that came out. Someone joined late, but they asked, did we cover if each elevator needs its own phone line, or if the elevator or if the phone line can be shared? Does each cab need to have its own phone line, or can that be shared?
So I'll speak on that briefly. So the code actually states that the operator has to identify where the call is coming from without being prompted. We went over that in a few slides back. A lot of times that's taken as, okay, you need one phone line to send the caller ID for this one elevator, and that's how we accomplish that, one phone line per elevator. The code doesn't actually read it has to be one phone line per elevator. It just reads that fact that the operator has to identify the call. So there are ways of doing that without having one line per build or per elevator. Think of it similar to the way an alarm system works. This is how Kings 3 system works. So you may have a consolidator that can be either the cellular technology that we talked about or connected to an analog line and provide dial tone service to up to 4 or 8 cabs, depending on the device that you have. And they break those each individual elevators down into different zones, similar to the way an alarm system would work. So say, for example, your alarm system at your house, you've got zone 1 as your front door and zone 2 is your back door. Now they're communicating with that device and you're able to tell which device it is. However, they're just using that one form of communication, either the telephone line or the cellular network. Same goes for a lot of manufacturers in the elevator communications business. That's how our system works. You may have a bank of 4 elevators using either one dial tone or one internet connection, because we are able to identify each individual cab when the call comes in. So to answer the question, the most important thing is ask yourself, can the operator identify where I'm calling from without being told? You mentioned line sharing in the question. Line sharing is a totally different animal than what we were just speaking about. Line sharing is basically a party line where you're daisy chaining phones together through a series of wiring. You know, you may have 3 cabs that are all tied together on one dial tone, however, not running through the proper system or the proper piece of hardware. That phone, that either one of those phones could send a signal to the operator and them not be able to tell you which one of the 3 that you're calling from. So to answer your question, it can be done, it just has to be done correctly.
Got it, thank you. And I believe we have one more, and this is more just a clarified question. The 2018 adopted by Virginia, is that the 2-way live audio video with a June 30, 2022 deadline?
It's my understanding that's when they're going to adopt, but a lot of that's really unclear to us from the vendor standpoint. We're really all the time kind of playing chase to keep up with who's adopted what at what time.
Jessica, I actually have a question into the to one of the people, to the guy who like runs Fairfax County, asking like, what does that mean? Like, are certain elevators grandfathered if they were installed in a certain code year? Is it everybody? Like, what does that requirement look like for IBC 2018 in Virginia specifically? Once I get that answer, I'll send it to Cynthia to send out as part of this package. Hopefully it can provide some clarity, because I'm with James. Like, I've felt the same way. A lot of times it's just trying to figure out exactly what the intent is by whatever that locality is, and it could be different depending on who you talk to.
Right. Being as we're a nationwide monitoring company, we've tried to keep a map updated of who's on which version of IBC and ASME. And we've had to put a disclaimer on the bottom that we're basically trying to keep up as fast as we can. So if this shows something different than what information you may have, it's just for that reason. It's just trying to keep up with everybody all at the same time.
Perfect.
I have a couple of questions. I didn't put them in the chat. I was just gonna ask them.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, okay. So James, you mentioned the two-way video and the screen. Is that something that a company like Kings 3, you guys can provide that screen? And in addition to like installing it and monitoring it, or does that screen have to be purchased through the elevator service provider? Like, how does that work?
So we decided early on that we were not going to get into the hardware manufacturing side of this. The reason being is we were envisioning that as a bolt-on solution, which we know would not look great in some of these elevators. So what the position we took is that we're going to try and monitor whatever hardware's out there. Whoever has something on the market that can be monitored that's not proprietary, then we're going to do our best to do that. So what that means is at the fixture level, they're being drawn into the plans basically, and added at that level. That way it can be a clean install. Everything's integrated, and it doesn't look like it's an afterthought or an aftermarket bolt-on. Now, we may change our tune down the road. We are seeing things, 2.0 versions of these coming out, where people are starting to think about integrating the voice and the video transmission all into one integrated internet feed. When that happens, things are going to change as far as hardware. We may change our line of thinking at that point. But yeah, for now, it's purchased at the fixture company level. It comes, if you're buying a mod kit, it's already pre-wired. Really all you're doing is hooking up the travel cable and connecting the internet and the 24 volts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to add on to that question then, good information is, so let's say you're in an area, so let's say you're in Virginia and they are not right now adopting the new 2019 ASME code, like Maryland is, but you're going to be doing an elevator mod or you're getting a new elevator installed. Could you go ahead and do that two-way video and meet the code, the 2013 code? Like, is it okay to go above and beyond for the safety of the passengers?
It is. So the nature of ASME and IBC is when they make a change, they're not subtracting anything from the code, they're adding to the code. So like I said before, the emergency phone still exists in its form. It still is what initiates contact. So if you were to install a system that meets ASME 2019, it's still going to meet the previous requirements.
Okay.
These are all additions. We're not taking anything away from the old codes, if that helps clarify it a little bit. I will say that in the event that you do have an elevator that you've installed to meet 2019 code, every functioning piece of that has to be in working order, even though it's not required by whatever code year you may be on. So say you're on 2016 and you install a 2019 compliant system, the only piece of that that's working is the emergency phone and not the video, you're still not going to be compliant. You would have to have it working if it is installed.
Okay, that's the same thing with elevator handrails. If you
Yeah,
you have to have them compliant. So
right, exactly.
I'm gonna add on something too that came up. James or Frank had mentioned NFPA. When it comes to elevator code compliance, one thing I see get overlooked because it's what I specialize in. Your elevator interiors must also meet NFPA requirements, which is Class A fire rated materials. They have to have a 0 to 25 flame spread. So generally, depending on which area jurisdiction you're in, that means that you're required to use a licensed elevator cab interior installer that is providing to the counties which material that they're going to be using. That has to be inspected to confirm you're not using flame spread, Class B or Class C fire rated materials that could suffocate somebody if it caught on fire. So just to add on to the NFPA comment.
Perfect. Well, everyone, thank you guys so much. Brittany, James, Frank, the people that supported you, Tiffany, Dave from our AOB Emergency Preparedness Committee. Thank you guys so much for all of your work and this effort here today to present what I believe is a very important topic to the members of AOBA. For the members that logged in today for today's webinar, this will be available. As we stated at the beginning of our presentation today, that this was recorded, we can provide it. And I cannot leave without thanking our AOBA support team of Brittany and Cynthia, who have done another amazing job of putting together a webinar, assisting with getting these things done and helping us all out with being able to put on great products like this. I believe this is maybe our 7th or 8th webinar this year, and they have all been very, very helpful. And hopefully you all have benefited from them. I want to remind everyone that the AOBA holiday party is fast approaching on December 2nd. So if you have not pre-registered, I highly recommend that you do. It'll be a great opportunity. We haven't been around each other in person in like 18 months. So it'll be a good opportunity to spread some holiday cheer and spend a little time with colleagues and getting to know each other a little bit better than we do now. So highly encourage you to join up and reserve your spot, and we look forward to seeing it. If you happen to go and you happen to see me there, please feel free to come up and just say hello and introduce yourself to me, because I'd love to meet all of you guys in person. With that, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for supporting the AOB Emergency Preparedness Committee. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.